certainly, on behalf of the Orchard family, I want to let you know our love and appreciation for those that have come to support Dad. I look out across here and I know he would be pleased to see each and every one of you. It was fun to reach out and get a chance to put some faces to the names. Thank you for your time and effort. I'd certainly like to thank the Bryant Funeral Home as well for just doing such a super job and getting things looking so good. And it's good to see all the family here. I loved Lacey's guitar. Probably one of the first times I've had a chance to hear her play and sing, and just absolutely gorgeous. And I love you, Lacey. That was beautiful. Thank you for doing that, and for my daughter Mary as well. There's an old saying that the difference between heaven and hell is heaven is getting a chance to tell your story. Hell's having to listen to it. So with that being said, I'm also going to take the counsel of my daughter. This is Rob Orchard story number 1. We were at a ceremony, and it might have been a wedding, and this minister, this is a true story, Elizabeth reminded me of this. And the minister gave a super sermon, but almost right afterward, and you can see Dad do this. Dad walks up to him, and he puts his hands in his pocket like this, and he looks up to him, and he says, he said, you could have cut that in half and made it twice as good. Rob Orchard, right? Seriously. So my ambition and goal here is to cut it short. I'm only going to start back in 1820, which is about 200 years ago, but I have to, just for the mere facts, to bring in how Rob Orchard got to be where he's at, but I'm going to move through it quickly. There was the orchard name that I first really started tracking to came back from Anderson Orchard, which Scott is, I believe, your middle name. And Anderson married Caroline Emmerich when she was 14 years old. They had 14 children, actually 12 and then adopted 2. Apparently 12 wasn't enough, so they needed to get rid of 14. And they had, his 4th child and 2nd son was a man by the name of Robert Rake. And Robert Rake married a lady by the name of Bella Childs. And they had 7 children. And their 3rd child, 2nd son, was Charlie Ellsworth Orchard. And Charlie came back out of this country, out of Iowa. They originally came out of Iowa, and he came back when he was 18 years old on a freighter with his brother, and they ended up somewhere around Casper. And in the process of that, Charlie got involved in the sheep business. I talked to Dad about this probably just maybe a month ago. And just south of Waltman, there's a place, and folks, if I'm messing stuff up here, please come talk to me afterwards and correct me on it. That there was a pretty good sheep ranch south called Woolton. And that Charlie got in there, and that's where I think he learned to start to work with sheep. And in the springtime, they'd bring the sheep over the pass. I don't know if they came through Cottonwood, and here on that west-facing slope of the Bighorns is where they started to run sheep. And at that time, his soon-to-be wife was Mabel Goodrich, and she lived with her family at the Mahogany Butte Ranch where the Hamptons are. And in that process and how they fell in love, I don't know. They got married in 1902. And as the story goes, they were out hanging out in the field, and she comes out and she said, Charlie, I'm done. She was cooking for a big hay crew, 18 years old. She said, I'm done. And so Charlie sold the ranch, as it was told that day. And he moved the family out to Lander, where he took a job selling coal and ice. So he had a job year-round. And somewhere in that process, maybe when he was herding sheep, he got out in that country and he ran across some black stuff coming out of the side of a hill. And he got to reading up on it, and it's oil. So he got in the oil business, joined an oil company over there. And some of this story that I get comes from one of his good friends, Charlie Taggart, because they said that thus he was dubbed, the name is Black Oil Charlie. Well, so that has him over in the Cody country. So we've actually jumped quite a bit of time here now, so that's good. And Granddad had 3 kids. Great-granddad, I'll call him Padu from now on. Padu had, there was Fern, there was my granddad, Bob, Robert, and then there was Bert. And they formed what was called the Orchard Ranch Company. And at that time, they had what they call the Bates Creek Ranch. And interestingly enough, and I learned this from Uncle Ken, Stella, who was Mabel's sister, she was married to a Hopkins. You guys will be able to correct me on this, who was at Big Trails. And so through Stella is how Charlie ended up acquiring the Big Trails Ranch, which was the original ranch that they came into. But that had him over there in Cody, and Granddad was down in Denver, my granddad, and he was one of his best friends was a guy by the name of Max Chamberlain, whose sister was Marlene. And after, for whatever reason, Granddad met Marlene and fell in love with her at the doorstep, is what I'm told. And so, you guys have a dry mouth. That helps a little bit. And so they ended up going back in the Cody country, and that's where Dad was raised as a little boy. And the story that grandmother told me about, there was one of Dad's childhood friends, a guy by the name of Charlie Taggart. You probably know the Taggarts as well as anybody. And grandmother would look out the window, and apparently Dad was tied to the clothesline, so he could only wander so far. And she said she could look out the window, and Charlie Taggart would come down, she says, with his little fat fingers, about 3 or 4 years old, and he would undo Dad, and they'd take off running down the alley to Charlie Taggart's place. And Charlie was the youngest of 9 children. And interestingly enough, the youngest of 90 grandchildren, so he had a lot of experience. So if Dad was going to learn his way, the ropes of whatever, came from the Taggart home. And I spoke at Charlie Taggart's funeral 20 years ago. And I can't help but think, and just as a side note, it's believed that before Dad, who's obviously in the afterlife now, but before they depart, that they're allowed to participate here. So I'm sure that Dad was well aware of everything that's being said and what's going on right now, which is kind of sweet. Dad, during the middle school's age, they one of those sandlot over in Cody, and I can only imagine they played a lot of football, and Charlie Taggart would end up on one side and Dad would end up on the other, and they were always scared of Dad having the $1 million play that Granddad had handed down to him. But Charlie said they always countered with a guy by the name of Fatso DeWeese, who they said they could hand him the ball and they would jump on him like ants trying to take him down. But that was the way they countered the $1 million play. When Dad was, this is kind of a sweet story, when he had finished the summer of his 4th grade, they were still at the Big Trails Ranch. He was 9 years old, and Granddad, Bob, bought 200 head of steers, about $12 a head, if you could imagine. And they brought him into Bates Creek, and the idea was to trail him up to Stella's Flat, and they were going to summer up there on grass. And I don't know, Charlie and I were talking last night a little bit about the mail house there on Big Trails, but there was a lady that ran the mail station there who had a daughter, and she had a black horse but wanted a bike. Well, Dad wanted a horse. So they made a deal, and Dad bought this little half-trot black horse, which he ended up calling Darky. And on a clear moon at 3 in the morning, he and Granddad head out, and Granddad tells him, he says, Robbie, he says, I just want you to make sure that the last one makes it. I'll take care of the lead. And so away they went. They got as far as Deep Creek that first night. There's a log cabin where the yellow house now is. And there was a couple there, and I don't know, Dad said that they kind of did the gardening up at the ranch and stuff, but they got in there in the evening, and they, right with the road turning into the house into Deep Creek, they ran a saddle ropes across the road and tied yellow slickers on it to keep the cattle from wandering up and down the road. And when they got up the next morning, the steers were just starting to work their way through the road to head up, so Dad said we picked them up and kept them coming. And they got up in there, and at that time the ranch was Bays Creek. This is in 1941. The Noble and Bragg Ranch was purchased, as well as Deep Creek. And Dad, they got up into, they stayed there. His Uncle Bert and Aunt Ruby lived in the Lone Tree House, where Lacey and Mike are now. And that's, in fact, Dad slept in the office. That's where he did as a little boy. And they would go out every morning, and these steers hadn't quite settled down yet. He said there was always these 75 head. He said that what they'd have to go out and find. And he said, Granddad, he said, had a horse that he got from the ranch named Rooster. And old Rooster, I guess, was kind of a handful to give Granddad a lot of slack, but Dad said that Bob was a great horseman. And that's where my dad really learned the love for punching cattle and horses and stuff. That's where he connected most deeply with that. So he said an interesting story. They were about a couple of months up there, 60 days, and he said that when he got into a vehicle and drove, and I don't know if it was bird driving or whatever, but he drove 30 miles an hour, and Dad said it just scared the hell out of him. And then between his 8th and 9th grade year, grandmother, Marlene, they moved him back down to Denver, and then that's where Dad and Kenny went to school, and on summers and on special breaks, they would come up to the ranch and help Granddad out. Dad ended up going to school there at East High. He graduated in 1950. Following that experience, he did a short stint out at Dartmouth, which is back east, and he just didn't really care for that so much, and came back early and then finished up at Boulder, Colorado. And interestingly enough, when we talk about legacy that Dad has left us, is he loved to ski, and that's what one of the legacies that he gave his kids. And in fact, if we talk about some of the memories that I think a lot of my brothers and sisters have, and even my mom, it was the skiing on the lace-up boots, and when Meadowlark was, this is a great experience, right? And so Dad ended up. After he got back in the Air Force, it put him down in a place called Big Springs, Texas, which was at the Webb Air Force Base, where Dad went to flight school. And that's where he learned to fly planes and stuff. About 40 miles away from there was Midland, Texas. And Mom worked for a company, I think Honolulu Oil, and the owner of the company, or she worked for her boss, was named Mr. Donnelly. And I'm gonna, again, I'm doing as good as I can here. And they went out on a blind date, and the Donnellys knew apparently Uncle Bert, and that was the connection of Dad going down to flight school, went on a blind date because Mrs. Donnelly thought they would just make the best couple in the world. And they got married, I believe, in 1956, and pretty close, 58. What year were you born? Okay, 59. So probably, I think it was even 57, and then Mom was. I don't want to bust it for a year, but then I've thought a lot about this. Okay, my mind's just going crazy up here. So the bottom line is, we know the tribe was born in 58. We agree with that, right? 59. Okay. Talking about being under the gun. So then they. Mom and Dad, they moved back up here and started getting the ranching business, and that's where Mom raised us kids. And folks, I wish how much we love you. this red soil never leaves you. Never does. Walt Whitman shared a poem that breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself has said, "This is my home, my native land," whose heart has within him burned, as homeward his footsteps he has turned, from wandering on a foreign strand. This valley is a valley of not just orchards, it's of all of you. And we love you for that, for your kindness and your support and love that you've given each and every one of us. As I'm wrapping this up, that marriage with Dad lasted almost 20 years, and Dad later married Phyllis Keynes. And as I thought about that, these relationships that Mom brought in the family, and Phil's dad's love for the cows, and then Suzanne. She was the one that gave him the companionship, and became a great companion to him in his last days, and such an amazing contribution. I want you to know how much we love you, and thank you for just your immense capacity to do hard things. Dad is a great man, but man, he was a tough guy too sometimes, right? And God bless Suzanne for her great effort, and I want to recognize my family too. April and Robin, as they've really took care of Dad in the last waiting days, and Robin, the amount of travel that she's done to come back in here. And it's been really a miracle. If you know much about our families are tough gigs, aren't they? And for whatever reason, probably a tender mercy, and maybe Dad coming to peace with his God, we've had a chance to get our family back together. And I love my sisters, and grateful for my best friend Charlie, who's been a great patriarch for our family. And I'm doing pretty good. You guys, I promise you. One of the things I prayed for was great composure on this. I'll just share one final story of my memory with Dad. I'm not big on funerals. I don't like him at all, and I don't particularly enjoy seeing people laying in a casket. But you know what? Dad looks good. He looks good. And I'm grateful so much for that memory of him. But this is one memory that I do have. It was in the spring. It was with my brother Charlie, and I think Walt Geist was probably there too. We had bringing in the horses, kind of in the spring horse roundup. And we got dumped off. The horses were kind of banked up on Buck Ridge. So we were talking about last night. And Dad had flown, right? When doesn't he fly pilots out there? There was a love that Dad had. I don't know if anything surpassed it. It's fine. Thank you, brethren out there that were such good friends with him in the pilot circle. So he dropped us off on the back, and he came down the Ant Corrals and kicked us out, and we started working our way up into the Buck Ridge, and we hit the horses, and I don't know if there was 30, 40, 50 head, I don't know how many, but for whatever reason, we popped over on the top of the swell down in the Stellas, and and I was in position that just kind of put me in front, and Charlie and Walt were flanking on the side, and we threw the slack to it. We were running just about as fast as we could, dodging as many of those badger holes that they would let us. And Dad had gotten to the corrals and was coming out to meet his horseback. And he was probably about 200-300 yards away, and I know he could see that we were coming hard and fast. And so he spun his horse around and just started riding, and we hit him about in full stride. I was right up next to him, and he looked like a little kid. A smile on his face. And I looked over at him, and it just seemed like for a minute, we kind of left the earth. And we eventually landed, right? And got back into that's a special memory that I have with Dad, and there's lots of them, and we certainly want to focus on those today. I'm grateful again for each and every one of you. for your time and efforts. And I know there are personal stories each. It's good to see my cousins here. Love them dearly. And Ken and all. That being said, I'd like to leave my appreciation and love and testimony of the gospel. I do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.